Nancy, 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 Nancy. This is the only room left in the house, Nancy. Famous last words that Nancy Benoit heard before she got tied up in a phone call. It's a Benoit family Christmas that took place on June 23rd and 24th of 2007 in Fayetteville, Georgia. And oh boy, on that note, I'm John Renton with a retro view of To All a Good Night from 1980. Goodness me, this movie was shit. Absolute goddamn shit. But Merry Christmas and to all a good night. Okay, this movie sucked. This was really, really bad. It's on Shudder and a few other streaming services. You could check that out. And hey, at least if you watch it on those, you know that you're paying a slightly, just nominal monthly fee to watch that and a bunch of other movies. So you don't actually have to plunk down $3 to $4 to watch this slasher that basically was just like anything in the late 70s, early to mid 80s. And it was directed by David Hess. If that name kind of rings a bell, but you can't quite place it. Remember Last House on the Left, the original? Krug. Him. Yes. That man. The man that was such a vile, oh God, he was such an evil son of a bitch that you couldn't help but root for his demise. Rest in peace, David Hess. He passed away about 11 years ago, and this was the only feature length that he directed. He acted in a few other movies and everything, and he was a better actor than he was a director. Again, rest in peace, David Hess. This was written by Alex Rebar. Not Rebar McIntyre, not Rebar that you put in your house foundation to set it. He did Demented and Terror on Tour. I believe he also passed away a number of years ago. So anyway, nobody really of note is in this. There's Jennifer Runyon, who played Nancy. Nancy. She was the final girl, by the way. There's going to be spoilers because, one, this movie came out in 1980. Obviously, anybody that has seen it would know all about it. Even if you haven't seen it in a number of years, you could plunk down, just set up, and you would automatically know 5 minutes in who the killer is. It's pretty goddamn obvious who the killer is. Basically, it's taking place at a finishing school for Catholic girls. All right. Now, I know exactly where I'm going to go. Anyway, moving on from that. There's a killer Santa Claus. Why? Because it's taking place around Christmas. It's Calvin and Hobbes finishing school for girls. That would have made the comics more interesting. So yeah, 2 years prior, so I assume 1978, unless it's taking place in some alternate universe where they're stuck in 1980 and we're in the year 2100, when there are no cell phones, no flying spaceships, as opposed to grounded spaceships or anything. There is a prank where people are chasing this girl around while she's on drugs. They're chasing her with an axe and chasing her or whatever, and then this one girl tries to stop her or pushes her off this balcony, and then this dummy falls in her place, and somehow that kills her. This movie had a budget of $70,000, and it didn't even seem like it had a budget of $700. Honestly, the gore effects, the acting, the camera work, the sim score, everything about this was third rate. Not even second rate. This wasn't even nearly as fun as Terror Train, and Terror Train wasn't very good. So now we go to present day. And there's this finishing school for this finishing school for girls. Finishing school for girls. I don't know if I can say that with a straight face. I can't think it with a straight face. And there are a bunch of mid-20-somethings playing college students where they're finishing each other, seemingly. There's Alex, Forrest Swanson. He shows up a little bit later. That's a guy. Then Lydia Gentile, who I guess, playing Melody, who I gotta say is very lovely. And then Kiva Lawrence. Not Barbara isn't here, Mrs. Torrance. No, Mrs. Lawrence. That's how we're going with. Not Vicki Lawrence. Not any of that. No, she plays the head mistress of the finishing school for girls. I'm sorry. I can't help it. Okay, I'm just going to say right now that Mrs. Jensen's the killer because that was her daughter in the beginning. Why? Because why the fuck not? That's basically... Well, why not just copy Friday the 13th? It came out just a bit... I think it actually came out later than this, and this movie actually kind of got forgotten about because I think the release date for this was January of 1980, and then Friday the 13th got released a little bit later. Friday the 13th handled it better. It may have not had a huge budget and may have launched a franchise that has seemingly gone to the goddamn dirt and into dormancy to the point where I think people forget that it was ever alive, but it's certainly better than this. So, yeah, there's a creepy groundskeeper named Ralph who kind of dresses in red pajamas like he's He's the bearded guy from Giant Spider Invasion. If you remember that MST3K episode, I'm actually trying to remember the guy's name. I know that he was in Touch of Satan. He was actually in movies that were good at one point. If you are a non-MST3K fan, you have no idea what I'm saying. If you are, hitting the booze again, Ev. And then the girls decide they want to have some fun. They want to have some guys arrive, so they drug Miss Jensen. You know, the woman that's the killer that had her daughter was drugged, and now she's out for revenge. That's a good idea. Also, it's obvious that she's the killer. Somebody's in the Santa Claus mask and everything and all that. It's really, really bad. The gore is stupid. The day for night filming. The fact that they sound like nice death scenes. I sure wish I could see them. Santa killed. Mrs. Jensen kills Mrs. Jensen or the cop. It's one of the two, because there's a cop that's her husband also that shows up halfway through the movie. One of the two is doing the killing. Now, the two killers isn't the worst. It's the better version of that Spin Doctor song, Two Princes Just Go Ahead Now. These girls are just getting killed indiscriminately. One guy gets killed, one other girls gets killed, and then people just start dying indiscriminately with no goddamn, thought or pacing or whatever. There are long scenes of everybody getting offed. One named Sam got killed because she made the pants too long, which I will shoehorn into every movie that has a character named Sam. And then there's this one point where Nancy is walking from the outside in and through the house, and I think it was about 90 seconds. 90 seconds of like an 85-minute movie. And the sex scenes were certainly not, they were not gratuitous, they were not gratuitous, they were pretty bad. I mean, I'm not saying that you need to actually have actual sex take place, but there are better scenes that have taken place in movies before and since, and even during 1980. And this one just seemingly didn't seem to care about doing any of that stuff. So, yeah, eventually this cop shows up and tells his two assistants, hey, you stay here and don't touch the girls. Okay, oddly specific. Oh yeah, and the groundskeeper ends up dead. That's why the cops show up suddenly. And the cop tried to warn, or not the cop, but the groundskeeper tried to warn, you need to pray or otherwise they'll take you away. I sense something's wrong, says the crazy, wide-eyed man in the footy pajamas. Very, very weird. Very weird. It was like Long John Silver, if Long John Silver was a creepy groundskeeper, which you would have to be on land for, and Long John Silver was a pirate. Let's move on. The cops are idiots. Everybody else is idiots. More people get killed. More people get their heads cut off. There is this one funny moment where this girl finds his head in a shower, and she is seemingly drugged or just completely off her goddamn rocker, because after seeing somebody, seeing all this death and everything, this girl is wandering around, la 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 la. So she was probably drugged. See, a lot of these scenes just kind of get thrown over and passed over and everything, and this movie should have been passed over because it was absolute shit. This other guy gets it's supposed to be razor wire. It looks like dental floss getting launched around or put around his neck and pulled up. And he gets hung and he gets his throat cut and his head seemingly chopped off. More people are getting killed. We hear from the killer, you killed my baby. It's Mrs. Jensen. What? The only person it could have possibly been? You killed her daughter. You drugged her. You did all this. And then she kills people. This guy Alex totally disappears. This nerdy guy. That him and Nancy seem to have a bit of a thing for each other. He disappears, reappears later. This is after somebody had been dispatched with a crossbow while fucking on a bearskin rug. Man, if I were that bear, I would have wanted to have been resurrected just to be killed again so I could forget about that. And they're dead. They're all dead. There was this plane that flew in that brought the guys earlier, and this pilot's freaking out. What the hell? What's going on? And then the killer is somehow there. Obviously, the killer was the cop, because there's no way that Mrs. Jensen, who was in the house, would have been able to do that. Chops him up like we're in Raiders of the Lost Ark, a year before Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, or about a year and a half. And then Nancy's left. She is being targeted by Mrs. Jensen. It's like, Nancy, there's nobody left. No, there's only one room left and everything. I've got the phone cord, and Daniels went to sleep. And yep, I'm going to get a lot of shit for that. And what happens is somehow Mrs. Jensen falls out the balcony or gets pushed. Really, really bad editing. Really, really bad editing. So she's dead. She's crying in the house now all of a sudden. Nancy is. And then somebody else in a Santa outfit, you killed my wife, you killed my daughter, and takes off the mask, and it's the cop, I should have killed you first. And then Alex suddenly is up there on the balcony with a crossbow, shoots the cop, he dies, and now they survived, and that's it. And Leia's just dancing around, la 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 la, into all a good night. That movie sucked. If it sounded like that plot went all over the place, my description of it, it's because that movie went all over the place, despite being seemingly in one location. It was bad. It was really, really bad. So agree, disagree with what I said, like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritland. All a good night. See you soon.